Chapter 31 Another Way. Everything was white. It was blinding to see, but anywhere Sunset turned, there was just more of the same. She kept walking because there was nothing else to do. There was nothing as far as she could see, so she just had to hope that she'd eventually find something. It took a while for her to notice the way the ground crunched under her feet. The white surroundings and the soft crunch of each step brought snow to mind, but when she bent down to touch it, she found it was warm. It left a powdery feeling on her hand, and she realized what it was. Sunset was walking through ash, and that was all there was left in her world. What had happened? Sunset had gotten the crown, that much was certain. Everything after that, however, was a blur. The only thing that she could vividly remember was the pain. There had been a lot of pain. Even if she couldn't remember anything after the pain, Sunset knew something very bad had happened. Something that she never should have allowed, but had never actually tried to stop. But she couldn't remember what it was, and she didn't know how to keep it from happening again. Humph. Sunset stopped in her tracks and turned at the sound. It wasn't just because it was the first voice she had heard since everything had gone white, but also because she knew the voice. She hadn't heard it in more than 11 years, but that unsatisfied tone had never left her mind. "You're going to have to do better than that." Sunset turned toward the speaker and was met with the disapproving gaze of her father. Brass Badge was a tan unicorn with a dark blue mane and perpetually unhappy expression, and Sunset couldn't stand the sight of him. "What's the matter? Am I ruining your perfect fucking legacy, asshole?" "She's just a child," Amara said. She was also a unicorn, with a golden yellow coat and a green mane, and she stood off to the side. She seemed to be focused on something else, but Sunset wasn't able to see what that was. "Don't act like you're better than him," Sunset told her mother. "In fact, don't you have business to attend to?" "Then stop acting like one," Brass Badge demanded. Sunset blinked. "I'm not a child." That had been her response at the time. She was watching a memory. Brass Badge turned to Golden Lace. "Baby your daughter if you want to, but I'll take no part in it. And besides, don't you have business to attend to?" Golden Lace looked upset for a second before turning away. "Yes, in fact, I do." Sunset looked from one parent to the other. She remembered this moment. This was when she realized that she hated them both. The hatred had always been there, but this was when she stopped buying into the idea that she should feel anything else for them just because they were her parents. Brass Badge was a bully, even if he never laid a hoof on his wife or daughter. Nothing was ever good enough for him, and Sunset had spent many of her early years hunting for his praise in vain. But at least he had shown he cared for something to do with his daughter, even if it was just the way she reflected on his legacy. Golden Lace was a successful business owner who threw herself into her work, and every time Sunset thought she might decide to stand up for herself or her daughter, she backed down. One parent who ran away from her problems, and one who tried to dominate all of his without regard for who was caught in the crossfire. And at the time, all Sunset had managed to say was, "I'm sorry, sir, I'll do better next time." It had been years ago and in another world, but Sunset felt her anger rise up at the memory. She walked over to Brass Badge and reached out a hand to grab him, but he turned to ash at her touch. She frowned and watched as it fell, noticing it was gray in the otherwise white environment. She turned to see that Golden Lace had also vanished, leaving only ash where she stood. Sunset looked around for any sign of anything else, but there was just her, ash, and the endless nothingness. Tired of walking aimlessly, Sunset sat down beside one of the ash piles. She had no idea where she was or why she was seeing her parents, but she knew it was because of the crown. She closed her eyes and tried to remember. She had become wrong. When she put the crown on, there had been pain, and then she had become something else. Or maybe she had only become what she always was deep down. There was a light breeze. Sunset felt it on her skin, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the ash blowing away. But rather than get carried off completely, it seemed to form a visible path. One lone path laid out before her. There was no other way. Sunset stood up, and she noticed something else that contrasted the white. A flower at the start of the path. It had a long green stem with no leaves, but at the top there was a blood-red flower with dozens of stamens sticking out in all directions. Like Horus radiata or red spider lilies, it was Sunset's favorite flower, although seeing it here filled her with trepidation. She had only one path to follow, but she made sure to go around the poisonous flower as she started walking it. The path twisted and curved, seemingly with no rhythm to its movements, and yet Sunset never questioned it. Something about the path felt right, felt familiar. It felt like she had always been walking it, like she always would. It was her path, and there was no other way. Somehow, Sunset hadn't noticed the next pony she came across until she had almost reached her. Perhaps it was her pristine white coat that allowed her to blend in, but the moment Sunset laid eyes on Princess Celestia, she broke into a run. Celestia smiled as she greeted her. "Hello, my gifted student." "Princess Celestia!" Sunset fell to her knees in front of the princess, sliding a little in the ash. "I'm so confused. Please, what's going? I was hoping you might want to join me in watching the sunset." Sunset looked up and blinked. This was another memory. It was Sunset's 10th birthday, the first she'd spent as Celestia's pupil. The princess had asked her if she would like to join her for a while after she'd celebrated with her family. Sunset had agreed, but hadn't been able to tell Celestia that she wished she could have spent the whole day with her. Celestia heard a response from a younger Sunset who wasn't present. "Well, Sunset is your name." "But it's just a time of day, Princess," Sunset said, remembering her response from so long ago. There hadn't been tears in her eyes when she had said it back then, though. The Celestia from her memories took no note of how far her gifted student had fallen, just smiling along as she spoke with a filly that had long since vanished. "True, but any pony can appreciate the sunset. Here, come watch it with me. Maybe you'll find you like it more than you think." And Sunset had. She'd never found the words to tell Celestia that, but she treasured the memories of watching the sunset with her mentor. At the time, Sunset had thought it didn't matter if she said anything or not. Now she wondered how many other things had gone unsaid. Usually, when they met to watch the sunset, they didn't speak. Usually, but not this time. This first time, Sunset had been too excited to show her teacher how much she knew about the sun and had launched into an explanation of why the colors showed the way they did, which meant that any moment now. "Very good, Sunset." Sunset bowed her head at the praise. She was anything but. "I'm not surprised you know that, my gifted student. Tell me, what do you know about the stars? Can you name the constellations?" Sunset looked up into where the sky should be, but there was nothing there. Nothing now, although she knew that in the memory, Celestia and Sunset would be watching the sky give way from sunset to twilight. The memory of Celestia vanished, leaving only ash in its place. "No!" Sunset reached out for Celestia, but she was gone, and there wasn't even a memory of her to sit beside Sunset any longer. All that remained in the place where Celestia had been sitting was a small patch of red spider lilies. With nothing else left to do, Sunset stood up and continued along her way. Ignoring the lilies wasn't possible for long, as they started sprouting up along the path as well. Patches of red and green dotted the gray, which otherwise remained the same. How long had she been walking the same path, and what would be at the end of it? "Hi, Sonny." Sunset winced. She didn't need to revisit a memory of Cadance. And yet, when she turned towards where the voice had come from, she saw a pink alicorn excitedly greeting her. "If I just poke you now, will you poof like the others?" "What are you doing?" Sunset frowned and folded her arms. As much as she wanted to poof Cadance, she wasn't looking forward to going back to the monotony of the path. She decided to wait and see where it would go. "I love to read. Right now I'm reading a story about a little filly who follows a rabbit down a hole and winds up in a crazy world and. Sunset tried to remember why Cadance had stopped talking, but before she could figure it out, the memory crumbled to ash like the others. Sunset blinked in confusion. Both of the other memories had been noteworthy. This one she barely remembered. She closed her eyes and tried to think. Cadance had been really young, so it was probably shortly after she moved into the castle. Sunset replayed the conversation in her head, and with some prodding, it clicked. One of their earlier interactions had been at the castle library where Cadance interrupted Sunset's reading, and Sunset had left. That was it. There was no big meaning to anything, no life-changing revelation. Sunset was perplexed that it had shown up after the others. When she opened her eyes, she saw a flower where Cadance had been, but just as surprising as the memory's appearance, it wasn't a lycoris. A pink rose grew just outside the ash path. Sunset looked around, but there was nothing else to see. She turned to look ahead on the path she had been walking. It was familiar, comfortable. It felt like she was supposed to be there and nowhere else. Part of her wanted to keep walking, certain that it would get her where she needed to be. But something compelled her to investigate the rose further. It couldn't be coincidence. Sunset had no idea why she was here or what she should be doing, and trying to take guesses were just that, guesses. She stepped off the path and walked ahead. It wasn't long before she noticed another rose. She kept walking. The ground below her feet changed as well. It felt harder, and soon she could see a path forming. It was an illustrious blue crystal, and was lined everywhere with pink roses. Decorations adorned the path, gemstones in the shapes of moons, suns, and stars. Compared to how long she'd walked the ash path, it wasn't long at all before she came to the end of the crystal one. She was baffled by what she saw, however. A bookshelf stood before her, and the path led right into it. Sunset didn't understand how that could be the end. Wasn't there supposed to be something here? Some sort of point to everything? She walked forward and placed a hand on it, and everything shifted. Sunset was in the library by herself, which was exactly how things should be. Princess Celestia was busy with her royal duties, and there were no classes to attend on Saturday. That didn't stop Sunset, though. At 15, she was already far younger than any of her classmates. In addition to the head start she'd gotten by starting school at 6 years old, she'd also advanced through classes faster than any of her peers. Ponies often called Sunset the most impressive unicorn her age, but she was determined to be more than that. She was going to go down in history. The name Sunset Shimmer would never be forgotten, but to make sure that happened, she needed to study, which she had been doing for hours without any issues, but which was about to become much more difficult. A pink filly was walking over to the table that Sunset was sitting at, and there was no way she'd have any peace. "Hi, Sonny," Cadance said cheerfully. "Don't call me that," Sunset said without looking up from her book. "What are you doing?" "Reading." Ignoring Sunset's complete lack of interest, Cadance sat down beside her. "I love to read. Right now I'm reading a story about a little filly who follows a rabbit down a hole and winds up in a crazy world and, Sunset stood up, cutting Cadance off mid-speech. She shoved the book she'd been reading into her bag, then walked away without a word. It was rude, but the last time Sunset tried telling Cadance to leave her alone, she wound up making her cry. And then, to make matters worse, Celestia had given her a lecture and guilted her into an apology, which only seemed to encourage Cadance into thinking they should still be friends. The sigh of defeat she heard as she was walking away told her that Cadance wouldn't be following. Good. She could avoid an argument and study in peace. If only she hadn't looked back. Cadance was sitting with her head on the table, not looking at Sunset. She didn't seem to be looking at anything, for that matter, or even doing anything at all. The sight was pathetic, and Sunset knew she should just keep walking. They would both be better off once Cadance finally accepted that they should just stay out of each other's way. But it was just so baffling to see Cadance so dejected only a month after she'd been giving everything that Sunset had dedicated her life to earning. What reason could she have for being so miserable? "Don't you have friends to go play with?" Cadance picked up her head and gave Sunset a confused look. "All my friends are back home. I don't know many ponies in Canalot." "You are a 13-year-old Alicorn princess. How are ponies not lining up to be your friend?" "I don't want ponies to be my friend just for that." Sunset rolled her eyes. "Yeah, what was I thinking? It must be so tough having ponies look up to you." "But it is!" Cadance pushed her seat back and leaned her body across the table. "Every pony suddenly expects so much from me, and I don't have any idea what I'm supposed to be doing." "Are you kidding?" Sunset teleported to stand next to Cadance again, causing the younger girl to jump back. "Just becoming an alicorn is more amazing than what most ponies will do in their entire lives. Do you know how many other alicorns there have been that were as young as you? None! You're the youngest alicorn in the history of Equestria. If you never do anything else for the rest of your life, ponies will adore you for that alone. Of course you don't understand. Cadance glared and pushed her face closer to Sunset's. You're so good at everything you do. You're better at magic than any pony, and you know, like, everything. And I can't even go to school with the other kids. I have to go to private lessons just so I'm not stuck with the foals in magic kindergarten. Hey, I worked for everything I have. Sunset poked her hoof into Cadance's chest accusatively, ignoring the tears that were forming in her eyes. Why do you think I spend so much time studying? Do you have any idea how many nights I've stayed up pushing myself past my limits to study a new spell, falling asleep out of exhaustion if I sleep at all? I know! That's why it should be you! Cadance tore her head away from Sunset's and stared at the floor. You're the coolest pony I've ever met. You're tough, you never give up, you keep getting better every day, and you do all that without a crown or alicorn wings. But I'm a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing when I stopped that amulet from stealing love. It was just a fluke. I definitely wasn't trying to become an alicorn. So it should be you, not me. You're the one who deserves to be a princess. Sunset stared at Cadance for a moment and considered what she'd said. Eventually, she sighed and took a seat. Well, looks like both of us are stuck with this now. Cadance laid her head on the table. I just want to go home, where I knew every pony and I didn't have to worry about letting them down. Not worrying about letting ponies down wasn't a luxury Sunset had ever been afforded, but she did know how lonely the castle could feel. She had been alone more often than not at her parents' house, but somehow all the ponies running around the castle only made that feeling worse. Sunset opened her bag and pulled out a small jar filled with dirt. She pulled off the lid and set it off to the side, catching Cadance's attention. Sunset just grinned. Check this out. Sunset's horn lit up cyan, and she reached out to a small seed within the jar. She willed it to grow, and a small sprout shot up from the dirt. Cadance gasped at the sight, which only made Sunset's grin grow. She hadn't seen anything yet. The sprout rapidly grew, becoming sturdier and darker as it did. Leaves and thorns appeared before their eyes, and in just a moment so too did a bulb, pink to match Cadance's coat, and it blossomed into a flower as she watched in awe. I'm working on growth magic for an upcoming exam, Sunset said as she cut the stem and passed the rose to Cadance. It's beautiful. Cadance attempted to grab it between her hooves, but she immediately pulled back. Ow! Sunset arched an eyebrow. You know you can use magic now, right? It'd make it a lot easier to avoid the thorns. Yeah, but I'm not that good yet. I don't want to smoosh it on accident. It seemed that Cadance hadn't been kidding about her skill level being magic kindergarten. She really was helpless. Well, if Sunset was going to be forced to live with Cadance, she would just have to make sure Cadance wasn't someone she'd be embarrassed to be seen around. It's not that hard, Sunset said as she scooted closer. Here, I'll teach you. Let's start by removing the thorns. Thank you, Sunset. Sunset could already see a losing battle. Just call me whatever you want. Really? Calm down, it's just a name. And if I'm going to be helping you, you better be taking this seriously. Although her giggle didn't sound very serious, her voice was calmer when she spoke. You got it, Sonny. What had Sunset gotten herself into? She should be working on her growth spell, not standing against the wall in a crowded room while some guy prattled on about his fruit store. Most of the ponies around her were adults, but there were a few other teenagers as well. That would be fine, except all the teenagers had congregated together, causing Sunset to feel out of place. The adults would have been fine. Sunset was used to being surrounded by ponies much older than herself. But teenagers? The only teenager Sunset ever spent time with was, begrudgingly, Cadance. Cadance. This was all her fault. Sunset's life had been going perfectly before Cadance showed up. She was living in the castle with Princess Celestia, the only other pony Sunset needed or wanted to be around. Sunset was a gifted student, and she was on the fast track to becoming the next Star Swirl Bearded. But then Cadance came along, and Sunset's life was upended overnight. Suddenly, Princess Celestia had less time as she had to oversee two young ponies' well-being. Suddenly, there was a younger filly who was always following her around and who always wanted to be part of whatever Sunset was doing. And try as she might, Sunset just couldn't say no to her. Which was how she came to be surrounded by a bunch of teenagers who were discussing which of the students was their cousin or brother or whatever. Or worse, giggling about which member of New Colts on the block was the cutest. Sunset had made the mistake of admitting she didn't know who they were, and now she was listening to a girl her own age going through an unnecessarily thorough explanation of every band member and what all their dreamiest traits were. As soon as the podium opened up and Sunset realized it was her turn, she teleported over to it. All she wanted to do was get away from the conversation as fast as possible, but the surprise reaction from the audience was a significant bonus. Sunset scanned the room. Most of the crowd in front of her were a few years younger than her. Along the walls and in the back were older ponies, relatives of the younger ones. There was a large banner in the back that read Family Appreciation Day. And there was Cadance, beaming at Sunset while waving excitedly. That was the worst change of all, because every time Sunset saw the excited little filly who looked up to her so much, Sunset just couldn't find it in herself to resent her anymore. Hello, every pony. My name's Sunset Shimmer, and I'm Cadance's big sister. I still don't see the point in this, Sunset said as she and Cadance walked up to a large house. Come on, Sonny, think of the good you're doing for a young filly. Sunset smirked and gestured toward the house. Look at this place, it's almost as big as my parents' house. They can afford to get her a private tutor. Yeah, but you're the best. Cadance wore a sly grin and nudged Sunset. Besides, we know you're really soft deep down. Sunset sighed and turned away. You should have stuck with the compliment. It had been over a year since Cadance had come to live in Canterlot Castle, and Sunset couldn't even pretend to not like her anymore. The pair were inseparable, and it wasn't just Cadance following Sunset around these days. As such, Cadance got a lot more leeway than any pony else. Calling Sunset soft? That was a step too far. But as Sunset turned to walk away, she found herself encased in a light blue aura. She didn't try to escape as Cadance levitated her back to her side. Your magic's getting a lot better. Thank you. I could still break out of this in my sleep. I know. There wasn't really any point in denying it. While Sunset wasn't thrilled to meet this filly that Cadance full sat for, she also wasn't going to go back on her word. So resigning herself to her fate, Sunset walked up to the door with Cadance. Cadance knocked on the door and flashed a comforting smile. Sunset didn't even bother trying to look pleased. After a few moments, the door was answered by a white unicorn colt with blue hair that seemed to be around Cadance's age. Oh, Cadance! He stood in the doorway and stared while Cadance giggled and blushed. Sunset made sure to commit everything she saw to memory so she could properly tease Cadance about it later. Hi, Shining, Cadance said and giggled again. Can we come in? Yes, Shining said too loudly. He blushed furiously and gestured for them to follow. Please, come in. Sunset was pretty sure that if she squinted hard enough, she'd be able to see the hearts floating over their heads. Shining led them into a living room where he and Cadance continued to fail miserably at anything that could even generously be described as flirting. As delectably awkward as this is, we're actually here to see your sister, Sunset said. Think you can get her for us? Shining seemed to notice Sunset for the first time. Huh? Oh, yeah, of course. Leave it to me. He fixed his expression into a determined stare and ran off as if he was charging into battle. The effect was kind of ruined by the way his voice cracked as he yelled, Twily! Cadance is here for you! Cadance didn't seem to find him any less charming, though. Isn't he dreamy? He's a dork. Aha. Cadance smirked as she arched an eyebrow. And this is coming from the mayor who reads textbooks for fun? Now that was just ridiculous. Oh please, I'm not a dork, I'm a nerd. Oh, forgive me, Cadance said in a mock apology. I shall, but only this once. If it happens again, I'll have to— Cadance! Before Sunset got the chance to reveal her punishment, a small purple filly ran down the stairs and dove head first into Cadance's outstretched forelegs. "Hello there, Twily. It's nice to see you too, but there's some pony I'd like you to meet." As they pulled apart, Sunset showed a confident grin. "You must be Twilight Sparkle. My name's Sunset Shimmer, and I heard you're looking for the best of the best to show you a thing or two about magic." Rather than addressing Sunset, Twilight turned to Cadance. "You're right, she does have a big ego." Without breaking her smile, Sunset turned to Cadance to find her wearing an innocent expression. Sunset was sorely tempted to retaliate, but for whatever reason, Cadance liked this filly, so Sunset decided to not embarrass her. That didn't mean she'd allow herself to be the butt of their joke, though. "Oh, it's not just big. I have the biggest ego in all of Equestria. It was so big that I had to move into the castle just so that there'd be enough room for it." Although Sunset was a little skeptical that Twilight wouldn't get a joke hinging on sarcasm and metaphorical size, the young filly laughed. "Cadance said you're her big sister." Sunset nodded. "That's right. You don't look like her big sister." Cadance and Sunset exchanged glances. There were several holes in Twilight's logic, but Sunset didn't know how to explain any of them to a child. But thankfully, Cadance had a lot more experience with kids, so she jumped in to explain. "Not all families are the same, Twily. Like my parents, for example. They're earth ponies, and they don't really look like me either, because they adopted me when I was a baby. Then Princess Celestia adopted me as her niece, and when I went to live at the castle with Sunset, we adopted each other as sisters." Sunset huffed. "And the less we talk about my family, the better." Twilight looked perplexed. "I just meant that it's weird the big sister is smaller." At least Cadance found it funny. Sunset frowned, but refused to not have the last word. "That's because Cadance is a horrible little sister. I keep telling her to stop growing, but she doesn't listen to me at all." Cadance stuck her tongue out. "Being the younger sister is much cooler, right, Twily?" "Right," Twilight nodded in agreement. "And besides, even if you had the same parents, only one allele needs to be different to change what type of pony you were. Plus, even two ponies of the same type can have foals of any type, since the trait can be recessive through generations." Sunset blinked in confusion, but Cadance was smirking. "Told you she's smart." Sunset looked from Cadance to Twilight and smiled. "How old are you again?" "9," Twilight answered. "Is it true that when you were 9, you became Princess Celestia's student?" Sunset couldn't help her smile widening just a bit as she nodded. "Sure is." "Wow! You must be really good with magic then." "Oh, I'm not just good. I'm the best." Sunset grinned as she remembered Cadance calling her soft. It seemed she'd be getting her revenge sooner rather than later. In fact, how about a little demonstration? With just a flash from Sunset's horn and a yelp from Cadance, Sunset transformed her perfectly maintained pink coat. While it had been short and even before, now it poofed out in curls all over her body. "What did you do?" Cadance asked as she ran hooves all over her body. "Oh, nothing." Sunset looked at Twilight and winked. "Just made you extra huggable is all." Catching on to what Sunset was getting at, Twilight wasted no time in throwing her hooves around Cadance. "You're like a lamb." Cadance patted Twilight on the back and laughed nervously. "Sunset, I don't want to be a lamb." Sunset rolled her eyes. "Relax, it's temporary." She waited until Cadance looked relieved to add, "Once we shave it all off, your new coat will come back in just the same as before." "What?" Cadance shot up straight, causing Twilight to jump back. Meanwhile, Sunset could only laugh. "I'm joking here." With another flash of her horn, Cadance's coat returned to normal. "That was amazing," Twilight said, while Cadance inspected her coat to make sure Sunset hadn't done anything sneaky. "Could I do something like that?" Sunset grinned. "Sure, someday. But for right now, I think it'd be better if you learned some spells that are more suited for your age level. So let's see what you can do." Twilight pawed at the ground. "I'm not very good with magic." Cadance placed a hoof on Twilight's back and smiled reassuringly. "It's okay, Twilight. Sunset is here to help you learn." Sunset's excitement to see Twilight's magic was replaced with shock once the little filly actually got started. She barely managed to levitate small objects and couldn't manage to do much else aside from that. Sunset hoped it was just her nerves, but whatever the reason, Twilight was bad at magic. which was a damn shame. Every time Twilight opened her mouth, complex magic theory came out. It seemed that she understood everything about magic except for actually using it. How could someone so smart struggle so much? As far as she knew, there was only one pony as dedicated to magic as Twilight was, but whenever Sunset pushed herself to do something, she succeeded. After they practiced for a little while and only wound up with an extremely distressed filly, Cadance convinced them to call it a day. To cheer Twilight up, they stayed for a little while and talked about all her favorite things. Unsurprisingly, they were all books. On the way back to the castle, Sunset found herself lost in thought. Cadance didn't seem to have that problem and maintained a cheerful composure. See, she's a lot like you. Except that she's well behaved, of course. Yeah. Sunset didn't even try to come back with a jab of her own. Cadance was quiet for a moment and then nudged Sunset. Okay, what's up, Miss Grumpy? Was it really that bad to spend the day with a sweet little filly? Cadance. Sunset frowned as she looked into Cadance's eyes. Does Twilight have any friends? Cadance's smile fell away as she realized what was on Sunset's mind. She's a lot like you. Yeah, that's what I thought. Sunset was who she was. She thought the things other ponies her age did was stupid, and she'd never give up on her goal to be the best. But ever since Cadance came along and she had someone else to pull her away from her studies, to laugh and remember that there was more to life, Sunset hadn't been nearly as miserable as she used to be. Twilight does have some things you didn't at her age, though, Cadance said, some of her smile returning. She has two parents who love and support her. She's got an older brother who includes her in the games he plays with his friends. She's got me. She nuzzled against Sunset's neck for a moment while they walked. And maybe she'll have you too? Sunset thought for a moment about all the study time that would be lost if she started to make regular trips into town. Only for a moment, though. Then her thoughts turned to a little amber-colored unicorn sitting by herself as she watched other falls through a window, with nothing but a book for company. Yeah, she's got me too. The sun had gone down some time ago, but Sunset was still awake. Only the light from her horn allowed her to see as she lay in bed with her book. It was so engrossing that she almost didn't notice a soft knock on the door. It's open, she called. The door creaked open, and Sunset was taken by surprise at the pony on the other side. Hello, Sunset, Princess Celestia said. I was afraid you'd already be asleep. Sunset quickly righted herself into a proper sitting position. Hi, Princess. Is everything all right? Celestia entered the room and took a seat on the bed beside Sunset. Yes, my gifted student, everything is fine. Your studies are going well, I take it? Realizing she was referring to the open book, Sunset smiled sheepishly. It's a novel. Cadance wanted me to read it, so of course it's a romance, but it's not bad. Was Sunset imagining it, or was Celestia more proud of her reading something because of Cadance than she had been when she thought Sunset was studying? I see. You two certainly have gotten quite close. Sunset blushed. I guess. It was obvious that Celestia hadn't come to talk about Cadance's book, but as usual, she took her time to get to her point. Sunset remembered how much that had frustrated her when she was younger and always eager to get to the next thing, but now she found it peaceful. Even without talking, Celestia's presence was calming. You've been my student for a long time, 9 years, and you've never stopped impressing me. Sunset smiled at the praise. Thank you, Princess. I'm just grateful that I've had the chance to. Did you know that I've learned as much from you as you have from me? That made Sunset blush even more. I don't know about that. It's true. Every teacher should learn from their students. Celestia looked around the room, taking note of all the books and completed projects scattered about. These days I'm struggling to find any more material for you. You've exceeded all my expectations, and I'm not sure there's much more I can teach you. The point of the conversation hit Sunset full force and left her with her mouth hanging open. Celestia wasn't taking her time to reach a point, she was softening a blow. There's still so much for me to learn, though. Yes, there is. Celestia placed a hoof on Sunset's, and she understood without needing to hear. Yes, there is, but not from me. Celestia looked down at their hooves as she spoke. Today was the entrance exams at the school. I met a promising young filly. In fact, I can only recall one other filly in recent times who had quite so much potential. That explained it. Celestia had found a new student who needed her, and she didn't have enough time to focus on sunset studies as well. She blinked as she willed away her tears and turned to Celestia with a smile. She couldn't ask for a better teacher. Celestia smiled as well. I'm glad to see you're taking this well, and I hope you know that I had not planned on things changing so quickly. But the amount of magical ability that she possesses could be a threat to herself and any pony around her if she doesn't learn to control it. Sunset nodded. I understand, and she'll be in good hooves. That's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. Celestia's smile grew as she looked into Sunset's eyes. She's going to need a lot of attention to learn to harness so much energy. I was thinking it may be wise to seek assistance in teaching her. For the second time, Sunset found herself awestruck at what Celestia was implying. But there was no way Sunset understood her correctly. There was no way she was asking her to... What do you mean? As Celestia answered, Sunset might as well have been a filly again, excitedly showing her beloved mentor that she also had a son for a cutie mark. You do have much to learn, Sunset, but a good teacher always learns from their student. I think the lessons you'll learn from this young filly will take you much further than I can now, and I can think of nothing more fitting for your final task as my student than to help me pass the knowledge I've given you on to another young pony. Sunset felt resolve course through her. Celestia trusted her with this, and there was no way Sunset would let her down. Of course, I'd be honored to have this chance. There is one more thing, Celestia said with a hint of playfulness in her voice. When I mentioned your name, our new student was quite excited. It seems that she may already know you. Does the name Twilight Sparkle sound familiar? Twilight Sparkle? Sunset shot straight up and found herself grinning. I'll take that as a yes. The strangest thing happened during her exam. It was going poorly, but then a flash of rainbow light in the distance set off a spark that seemed to unlock her ability. Well, I'm sure she'll tell you all about it. Twilight Sparkle. She finally did it. I'm glad to see you're as excited as she is. Now rest up. Tomorrow will be a busy day for all of us. Thank you again, Princess. Good night. Good night, my gifted student. Even with the excitement for her future, Sunset couldn't help but feel a pull at her heart with those words. I think I'm going to miss that nickname. Celestia paused at the door. Oh, Sunset, no matter what else you go on to do, I'll still think of you the same way. Celestia looked back, and Sunset almost thought she saw a tear in her eye. You'll always be my gifted student. Why did Luna need to have so many stairs? True, the trek to the top of the astronomy wing was really the least of her concerns, but that didn't make it less of a hassle. When she finally got to Luna's door, Sunset didn't bother knocking before entering. Courtesy was for ponies who didn't have the audacity to have their rooms on the opposite side of the castle from Sunset's. Besides, Luna already knew she was there. Greetings, Sunset, Luna said as the door opened. She hadn't needed to look up. Luna, Sunset nodded to Luna and then turned to the other pony in the room. Twilight. Sunset, please tell me you see how weird Cadance is acting. Sunset couldn't quite manage a smile for her student. Yes, I do, and that's exactly why I asked Luna to call you here. Twilight was just telling me about the things she's noticed today, Luna said as Sunset took a seat beside her student. It seems there is even more evidence to support your concerns. Both of you already know something's wrong? Twilight asked. Of course I know, Sunset said. Do you really think I wouldn't know something's wrong with Cadance? So then how come no pony's done anything about it? A sharp glare from Sunset reminded Twilight to keep her temper in check. Sorry. It's okay. I know you're worried about Cadance and your brother, but the situation is complicated. Sunset bowed her head. The main reason is that Celestia doesn't believe that there's anything wrong. I had something to do with that, I'm afraid, Luna added. I have the ability to detect ponies' unique magical signatures, Cadance is unchanged, meaning she is not an imposter. Or meaning the imposter is capable of faking another pony's magical signature, Sunset insisted. Wait, hold on. Twilight shook her head and then stared incredulously at Sunset. Think she's an imposter? Sunset nodded. Only after I ruled out mind control. No spells have been cast on Cadance, I made sure. Yes, Luna said. Sunset only seems to doubt my abilities, it seems. She's quite certain of her own. They'd been over this, but Sunset humored her again for Twilight's sake. I don't doubt your ability, I just think that some pony powerful enough could mimic another pony's magical signature. It is theoretically possible, Luna relented. Perhaps you could do it, Sunset. But it would take some pony comparable to your skill to even pull it off, and then require a considerable effort to maintain the illusion. Any pony skilled enough could surely find more devastating uses for their power than to interfere with a wedding, even if it is a royal wedding. But it is possible, Sunset reiterated. We can figure out the motive later. But wait, could some pony even do that? Twilight asked. They'd need to keep it up while sleeping, unless... She gasped. You don't think Shining's replaced too, do you? I haven't noticed anything strange with Shining, but I know Cadance, Sunset said forcefully, and that is not her. Remember that we are holding this meeting because I acknowledge your concern. Luna attempted to use the same look that had kept Twilight's temper in check. It proved less effective on Sunset, who was in no mood to quell the fire burning within her. There are 3 options, Luna said. The best is that you're both wrong and there is nothing to worry about. Both Sunset and Twilight attempted to speak, but Luna silenced them by holding up a hoof. The second, which I already know you will disagree with, is that Cadance herself has something underhoofed going on. The third is that Sunset is right, in which case we are all in a lot more danger than either of you likely realize. Twilight shot Sunset a nervous look. So what can we do about it? So far I've been monitoring her. As Cadance's best mare, I have an excuse to follow her everywhere. If she does anything to blow her cover, I'll be there to catch her. In the moment we have proof, I will not hesitate to apprehend her, Luna said. In the meantime, while our answer may not be clear, our way forward is. Sunset will continue to be Cadance's shadow, and I will continue to watch over the city during the nights. But what about the real Cadance? Twilight asked. If this is an impostor, we have to find her. Both Sunset and Luna stared at Twilight, who still took a moment to get the hint. Wait, you want me to find her? You're the only one who can, Sunset said. Since Celestia doesn't believe us and no pony else will listen, it has to be you. It may not be as futile as it seems, Luna said. Cadance is not being held in the castle, of that I am certain. I will make the time to search the city for her magic signature myself. Unless she is nowhere to be found within Canterlot, the only remaining place would be the caverns within the mountain. Twilight reared back. The mountain caves? But those are uncharted. No pony can navigate them. That is not entirely accurate. Luna cast a brief glance towards the door. My guards know the caves well. They have been instructed to assist you in this task, and are waiting for you outside the door now. Sunset could see the panic on Twilight's face without her needing to say anything. Twilight, listen to me. You can do this. You've taken on much bigger challenges than a search and rescue mission, and you always come out on top. Twilight took a deep breath. Thank you, Sunset. I won't let you down. Sunset nodded. I know you won't. She kept her certainty until her student was out of the room, then turned to Luna for encouragement. She's got this, right? Luna smiled. Twilight Sparkle is an amazing mare. She will certainly excel at this task. You're right, Sunset said, more to herself than Luna. Luna walked across the room to sit beside Sunset. Between the 2 of you, I must admit that I'm far more concerned for you. Sunset smirked. Oh, suddenly believe me about Cadance being replaced? I believe that is a possibility, but I also believe you to be capable of dealing with any situation that may arise. Luna gave her a concerned look. But I can see that you are exhausted. You've been working non-stop since this whole thing started, and you are burning yourself out. There was no point in arguing, at least not with Luna. As soon as she returned, she and Sunset had been fast friends, and she could read Sunset like an open book. Yeah, I haven't been sleeping well. Got any cure for that, oh nocturnal princess? Unless it is because nightmares are plaguing you, I'm afraid that I would not know any remedy that you wouldn't already know of. Sunset sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. On that note, I should head back. I have to go down all 6,000 bucking stairs after all. Luna placed a hoof on Sunset's before she could get up. You need not leave if you'd prefer to stay. You are welcome to my bed. Sunset chuckled. Geez, maybe buy her a drink first? I did not say that I would be in it. Remember that I shall be watching over the city until my sister is awake, by which time I suppose you'll be gone. It's sunset, not sunrise. Sunset was not the only open book, and she didn't buy into Luna's deflection for a moment. She leaned in a little closer as she continued. Suppose I'm not gone. Suppose I'm waiting for you. What happens if I'm still in your bed when you get back to it? Not to be outdone, Luna leaned in closer as well, touching her forehead to Sunset's. Whatever you might be comfortable with, but returning to find a beautiful mare in my bed, I shall not think I'll be complaining, no matter what that may be. Luna. Sunset pulled her head back just a bit. Is this because of the wedding? Luna frowned and turned away. Yes, I suppose it probably is. I apologize. You have been a dear friend to me, and I would not wish to be unfair to you. No, I just wanted to make sure where we stand before taking this any further. When it came down to it, Sunset suspected the stress relief would benefit both of them. She grinned and leaned her body against Luna's. Yeah, I guess you're pretty comfy. No promises, but we can see what happens. Oh? Luna perked up. Then it shall be a morning to remember. I have no doubt there. Even though it was tempting to just keep resting on Luna, Sunset forced herself up. But first it shall be a night to sleep through. I hope your bed is comfortable. Fit for a princess, I assure you. Sunset rolled her eyes and stood up. She barely made it 2 steps before wincing as the realization struck her. Your bedroom is up another flight of stairs, isn't it? Luna laughed. It is. You know, your magic is second to none, but perhaps you could benefit from putting some effort into your stamina as well. Although the thought of climbing more stairs filled her with dread, Sunset hid that as she rolled her eyes. Luna, come on. I'm an archmage of the highest order. Why would I need to exercise? Sunset made a mental note to exercise more often. Relying on her magic was always fine in theory, but now that it was about to be put to the test, she realized it wouldn't hurt to have more physical skills to fall back on. But whether she was prepared or not, time was running out. Twilight still hadn't found Cadance, and the day of the wedding had arrived. To top it off, there wasn't going to be a better chance to take action. Sunset and Celestia were alone in the dressing room with the pony who had taken Cadance's place. I'm afraid there's still no sign of Twilight, Celestia said with a frown. You know, she's been acting strange since she got here, the pink alicorn said. It's almost as if she's not even happy about my wedding. Sunset bit back her reply. Not the wedding, my wedding, as if shining armor wasn't even a part of it. The real Cadance would never talk about their wedding like that, especially in relation to Shining's own sister. Of course she is, Celestia insisted obliviously. I'm sure she'll turn up any minute now. And in the meantime, you've still got me. Sunset wrapped her foreleg around the impostor's shoulder. You know I'll always be around to look out for my baby sister. It was only for a moment, but irritation flashed across Not Cadance's face. Even when it passed, she did a bad job at covering it with an obviously forced laugh. Thanks, Sunset. I don't know what I'd do without you. Sunset, not Sunny. But no evidence mattered unless it convinced Celestia, who was far too preoccupied with the fact that one of her little fillies was getting married to notice anything so subtle. Time to see if she'd done her research. Sunset turned her attention to a bouquet on the vanity table that the impostor was sitting at. Pink roses, both of our favorite. Of course, you remember that time as teenagers, right? To her credit, Not Cadance didn't falter in the slightest. How could I forget? But you know, I don't think Celestia's heard it. Sunset glanced to Celestia, who looked perplexed. Not only was she aware of the day at the library, but she had been known to tell the story herself on occasion. Why don't you tell her about it? A little bit of looking back before your big day. Not Cadance grinned along, but her eyes flickered around. Oh, but you tell it so much better. That had been expected, so Sunset just grinned and rolled her eyes. I do, don't I? It was that time Cadance and I visited her parents. We were playing in the woods when Cadance yelled for me to come over. I thought she was in trouble, so I ran as fast as I could. But then when I got there, it turned out that she had stumbled on a whole field of pink roses. We found out later it was a florist's hidden stock, but at the time we really thought it was a whole field full of perfectly pink roses. Celestia looked like she was about to speak, but Sunset silenced her with a glance. Predictably, not Cadance just smiled along with the fake memory. I'll never forget that one. Celestia stepped forward to stand on the pink eloquent's other side, so that she was surrounded by the two other ponies. I remember when you first came to live with us, Cadance. I'd never seen two fillies become friends so quickly. Right from that first day, you and Sunset were inseparable. Perfect. Celestia could finally see it. It had been over a month before Sunset could stand to be in the same room as Cadance, which Celestia certainly hadn't forgotten. But of course, not Cadance didn't know that. Settling in certainly was easier thanks to my big sister's warm welcome. Sunset chuckled. Well, it's like I said. I'll always look out for my baby sister. Without warning, Sunset grabbed the impostor in her magic and threw her into the mirror. As she screamed and glass flew everywhere, even Celestia jumped back. Sunset! Don't you think that's a little too far? Look, you trail some bitch pretending to be Luna for a few weeks, and then you can tell me what's too far. Fair. The impostor's pink fur was stained red with blood as she crawled her way onto her hooves. What? Why would you? It's over, Celestia said. She held out a wing to push Sunset back. Only one changeling could pull this off so flawlessly. So why don't you drop the disguise and tell me where my niece is, Chrysalis? To Sunset's surprise, Chrysalis laughed and stood up to her full height. Green flames covered her body, and when they vanished, a hard black exoskeleton replaced Cadance's pink coat. She stood much taller, nearly as tall as Celestia, and she had holes in her legs and her wispy green mane. She looked like a demon masquerading as a pony. I knew I should have gotten rid of you when I had the chance, Chrysalis said to Sunset. Celestia used her magic to push Sunset back further. You will not touch her, and now that I know who you are, I will not allow you to hurt any pony again. A golden beam shot from Celestia's horn. It collided mid-air with a green one from Chrysalis, and Sunset could only stare. In all the years Sunset had studied under Celestia, she had never seen her mentor unleash the full force of her magic on anything. The force of the beams colliding resonated through Sunset and kept her transfixed on the sight. It should have been glorious. It should have been a story Sunset would tell for years. But when Chrysalis pushed her magic harder and Celestia failed to do the same, there was only terror. As Celestia fell, so too did Sunset's heart. I did it. Chrysalis looked down at Celestia's motionless body and stepped forward. I won! Oh, how the mighty! Chrysalis was cut off as a shielding spell was opened between her and Celestia, then expanded until it pushed her against the wall. She dispelled it easily, then glared at Sunset, who was standing protectively over Celestia. Get away from her! Chrysalis stepped forward slowly, using her large side to make an attempt at intimidation. Does the little pony think she can? Sunset lunged at Chrysalis, teleporting both of them as she brought her hoof into the changeling's face. By the time Chrysalis's horn was lit, Sunset had already teleported behind her. Ponies were screaming, and Sunset realized they were in the reception hall where the wedding was supposed to take place. Get Luna! She ordered to no pony in particular. You're a fiery one, I'll give you that, Chrysalis said as she turned to sneer at Sunset. But do you really think you can do anything to me when I've already defeated your precious little princess? Sunset burned with rage. It didn't matter what Chrysalis was capable of. Sunset was going to make her suffer. Try me, bitch. A green beam shot towards Sunset, who didn't even try to meet it head-on. Instead, she focused her magic on the marble floor, ripping a slab of it up and using it as a shield against the attack. It shattered, and Sunset could make out Chrysalis protecting herself from the rebel. Not Sunset, though. She ignored the stones that pelted her, not even feeling the sting. Her horn lit, and a ring of flame surrounded her and Chrysalis, separating them from other ponies. Chrysalis shied away from the flames, but Sunset welcomed them. The heat only fed the fire inside her as she stared down her adversary. "You have no idea what you're up against," Sunset told her calmly. "You're playing with fire now, Chrysalis, and you're going to burn." There seemed to be no end to the visitors. Every day since Sunset had woken up in the hospital, ponies had been in and out non-stop. It got to the point that Twilight had to step in and start scheduling when they could see her. Although her memories became blurry after a point, Sunset could remember most of the fight with Chrysalis. She had held Chrysalis off with fast thinking and clever uses of her magic, but there was no stopping the ending. Chrysalis's raw power had been enough to take out Celestia. The fire had thrown her off for a while, but eventually she managed to catch Sunset. It was hell when she did. Sunset had landed more than a few damaging blows on Chrysalis, and the Changeling Queen was not one to overlook that. But Sunset had turned her malicious nature against her, goading Chrysalis into hurting her so that she would delay the killing blow just long enough. Luna's arrival was the last thing Sunset could distinctly remember. Only once Sunset woke up was she able to take stock of her injuries. The most noteworthy was her left foreleg, which she might never use again. The bone had been fractured in several places, and even if it healed, it wasn't likely to heal fully. Even with magic, repairing something inside a pony's body was imprecise. They saved it from amputation, and what happened next would need to be discovered in time. There were 3 notable injuries on her face, but Sunset insisted those were merely cosmetic, no matter how bad they looked. From the same attack, Sunset had lost the tip of her right ear and a section of her mane, which may or may not grow back depending on how the scar tissue healed. There was also a cut across her face that she couldn't remember the origin of, spreading from her left cheek to her muzzle. There was a fair amount of bruising and more minor cuts. Some would likely leave scars, but none that was so bad they'd be highly noticeable through her coat. She'd also lost some of the hair on her tail from getting too close to her on fire, but she had put that out before it could burn her skin. Sunset just shrugged off everything but her foreleg when it came up, insisting that each one was a testament to having survived a fight with the Queen of the Changelings. It was only late at night that Sunset revealed her insecurities about her appearance, and even then only to one pony. Luna, however, assured her that she was still beautiful. Luna also filled her in on everything else that had happened. When Luna arrived, she managed to subdue Chrysalis. She attributed the defeat to Sunset wearing her down, although Sunset suspected that was just for the sake of her ego. Luna arranged for Sunset's and Celestia's medical care before leading both the Celestial and Lunar guards and ridding Canterlot of changelings. It was apparently chaos, even with Chrysalis subdued, but Twilight returned with Cadance, who was able to power Shining Armor's shield spell and immediately purge the city of changelings. Although many ponies had important roles during the invasion, Sunset's injuries and early action resulted in her getting most of the praise. To hear some ponies tell it, Sunset may as well have fought the changelings by herself. Sunset would be lying if she said she didn't enjoy the attention. It didn't make up for the loss of use of her foreleg, but it certainly helped keep her from being miserable about it all the time. Plus, between Cadance and Shining refusing to have the wedding until Sunset could fulfill her role as best mare, the overwhelming amount of pride she felt at Twilight's success, and Luna ignoring visiting hours to make late-night visits and cuddle with Sunset while she slept, her spirits were kept much higher than they could have been. Indeed, Luna, Twilight, and Cadance had been by her side constantly. Her other visitors included Spike, all of Twilight's friends, Twilight's parents, Shining Armor with a squad of soldiers, Cadance's parents, a couple dozen ponies Sunset didn't know but who had been there for the wedding, and even Sunset's own parents. Granted, that had been a painfully awkward visit that Sunset would have rather done without, but they still came. It seemed that every pony in Canterlot made the time to stop by her room and thank her for keeping the city and their loved ones safe. Every pony in Canterlot, except for one. When Sunset had first woken up, Celestia had been there, but in the flurry of doctors and nurses, she had vanished before Sunset could so much as speak with her. It took a full week for Celestia to visit, and when she did, she scheduled it in advance. That part irritated Sunset more than it really should have, but at least it gave her plenty of time to figure out what she was going to say. Hello, Sunset, Celestia said as she entered the room. Are you feeling well enough for visitors? 46. Celestia stopped in place. Come again? I've had 46 different ponies visit me this week. If Celestia saw Sunset's point, she pretended otherwise. I imagine that must have been a lot for you to take in. I hope you're still managing to get plenty of rest. You know, there's a funny thing about resting and talking with other ponies. Sunset stared pointedly at Celestia. The two aren't really mutually exclusive. Celestia took a step back. Is this a bad time? I can leave you alone if you'd prefer. How could the pony who had taught some of Equestria's brightest minds be so damn dense? I would have preferred if you didn't wait a whole week to see me. What, couldn't work it into your schedule sooner? Celestia bowed her head. I'm sorry, I didn't realize this would be so important to you. Sunset huffed and leaned back into her bed. No, of course you wouldn't. Celestia hesitated, likely worried that Sunset would start yelling again, then took a seat beside her. I brought you something. It was clear that Celestia was trying to put the issue behind them, and Sunset wanted to as well. When Celestia presented Sunset with a box of her favorite candies, Sunset wanted to thank her. She wanted to smile and make a joke about everything that had happened. She didn't want to be so angry, especially not at Celestia. Sunset closed her eyes and willed her temper to stay in check. I know you're busy. I know there's a lot of stuff going on with the aftermath of everything. But everyone else made it. Everyone but you. I... I'm sorry. I see now how inconsiderate I've been. Sunset opened her eyes to see Celestia had turned away from her. You weren't moving. There was no anger left in Sunset's voice, only the desperation and the lingering memory of terror that hadn't fully left her. I saw Chrysalis's attack hit you, and then... nothing. When I fought Chrysalis, I didn't even know if you were alive. Celestia's head sunk lower. Oh, my poor student. It is not right that this fell to you. If I had only been more attentive, I could have realized Chrysalis's trap before she had grown too strong for me to stop her by myself. Or I could have confronted her with Luna. I could have done something different that would have kept you safe. In all the years that Sunset had known Celestia, she'd never seen such a large crack in her ever-regal demeanor. Is that why you didn't come sooner? Celestia hesitantly lifted her head a little. I was not sure how to speak with you. Not after you suffered so much for my foolishness. It's not your fault, and I don't blame you or anything. Sunset grunted as she pushed herself back into a sitting position. I I know you're not my mom or anything, but you brought me into your home, you took care of me when I was growing up, you did a hell of a lot more than my real parents ever did, and it had been 18 years since Sunset had first been Celestia's student. 18 years of one of the most important and complicated relationships in Sunset's life, and yet she still found herself doing something for the first time. Sunset leaned against Celestia and used her one good foreleg to hug her as tightly as she could manage. I love you, and... Sunset broke down and found herself crying into Celestia's chest. And I was so scared I'd never get to tell you that. Celestia sat rigid for a moment, then slowly placed one foreleg around Sunset. Soon she wrapped the other around her as well, pulling Sunset in closer as she cried. Shh, it's okay. I'll always be here for you, Sunset. I love you too. The whole castle's been swept clean, Sunset reported. No sign of Sombra's magic remaining. Good, and the town? Shining and the guards are still checking it out, but a preliminary report from my Pegasi scouts suggests it's perfectly safe and secure. Cadance nodded solemnly. Excellent work. Thank you, Captain Shimmer. Sunset saluted. Happy to be of assistance, Princess Cadenza. Both ponies maintained eye contact for a moment, but soon Cadance caved in and started to laugh, and Sunset wasn't long to follow. I still can't believe this is all real, Cadance said as they walked towards her bedroom. Every fourth beat of Sunset's hoofsteps sounded slightly off. Thanks to a leg brace of her own design, she managed walking just as well as she always had, but her leg had never healed properly and her rhythm would always be slightly off. At least her officer's jacket covered the brace. The tip of her ear being gone, the missing section of her mane, and the scar across her face were always on display. But she didn't let it get to her too much. No pony in Camelot ever saw her as anything less than a hero, and even though it had been Twilight and Spike that saved the Crystal Empire, the Crystal Pony seemed to have nothing but respect for the new captain of the Crystal Guard. None of that would stop Sunset from teasing her little sister, of course. I still can't believe you roped me into following you here and cleaning up your messes. I don't recall you being too hard to convince, Cadance smirked. I actually thought you might not want to come, considering how much time you've been spending with a certain sun pony. Sunset chuckled. Luna and I will figure things out. I talked to her about it before committing to anything, and we're still on the same page about us. We have a lot of fun together, and we're very important parts of each other's lives, but we were never anything serious. Aha, Cadance said knowingly as they reached her room. Sunset grinned and blushed a little. And she said she'd come visit. Often. Cadance giggled. Of course. So, do you think the wedding should be here or in Canterlot? Sunset nudged her. Wherever you want it to be, since it's only going to happen in your dreams. Speaking of which, shouldn't you be resting up? You must be exhausted. Too tired to tease you? Never. Right on cue, Cadance let out a yawn. Although I am pretty tired. But I have to give you something first. I wanted to give it to you as soon as we got here, but then this whole ordeal with Sombra happened. Sunset followed Cadance into her room. Oh, is this a thanks for becoming captain of the Crystal Guard thing, or a thanks for being an amazing teacher to the mayor who saved me twice now thing? Neither. Cadance led them to a table which was empty of anything that she might give to Sunset. It's more of a thank you for being the best sister in the world thing. After spending so long keeping Sombra's magic at bay without sleeping, it was frankly surprising that Cadance found it in her to do anything at all. And yet, she focused her magic into a thin beam, which she aimed at the table. Where it touched, a short green crystal grew, then another on top, then another, continuing in a jagged line. After several segments, a larger pink crystal bloomed into a flower atop the green ones, creating a crystalline pink rose. Sunset levitated it over for a closer look. Crystals were hard to work with, and yet Cadance had created a perfect flower out of nothing, complete with individual petals. I've been practicing, Cadance said. I'm sure it's nothing compared to what you could do, but... Sunset shook her head and smiled. It's beautiful. A silver light poured into the room, just enough to reveal the face of a sleeping purple alicorn. Sunset carefully made her way into the room, stopping just short of Twilight's bed. She smiled at her student, but had to roll her eyes upon seeing that she'd just left her crown on the bedside table. It would have been a clean getaway, too, but Spike rolled over as she was trying to leave and Sunset tripped on his tail. She hit the ground with a grunt as pain shot through her bad leg, and she heard Spike's voice behind her. Huh? What? Sunset? Twilight asked as she pushed herself up. Spike rushed over to help support her on her left side. She smiled appreciatively as she made sure the crystal rose hadn't fallen out of the buttonhole in her officer's jacket. The damage was done, so Sunset limped over to Twilight's bed. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I was just checking on the night guards and thought I could stop in real quick to check on you. Oh, don't worry about it, Twilight said. I wasn't exactly sleeping soundly anyway. Speak for yourself, Spike added. Sunset laughed and poked his stomach. Oh, I have no doubt you were sleeping soundly. Frankly, I'm surprised I even woke you up at all. I don't sleep that heavy, Spike grumbled, causing both mares to laugh. And I think I can guess what's keeping you up, Sunset said to Twilight. Nervous about the summit tomorrow? Well, that's part of it, but mostly it's because of these. Twilight spread out a wing. I just can't get used to them. Sunset grinned. Unfortunately, that's something I can't help you with, but I'm sure you'll get used to it soon. I hope so. There's a lot to get used to lately. Yeah, I know. Sunset wrapped a foreleg around Twilight. But I know you'll do great, Twi. You learn from the best, after all. Twilight laughed. Thanks, Sunset. She looked at her crown and her smile dropped a bit. And I'm sorry. Sunset cocked her head. Why? Because I know you always wanted to be a princess. It was a testament to how much Twilight had grown that she had even noticed that. Sunset had never stated that so plainly to her, and as bright as her pupil was, she was usually very bad at reading between the lines. But it seemed that learning about friendship had given her reason to read other ponies better. Sunset resolved to be more careful with what she told Twilight in the future. You're right, I always wanted it. Sunset levitated Twilight's crown over for a better view, appreciating the small details that she might normally miss. And I guess, when it comes down to it, I still do. Being a princess just like Celestia has been my dream since I was 9 years old, but I know it'll never happen. It's not fair, Twilight said. I didn't even want to be a princess, and no pony deserves it more than you. Sunset smiled and set the crown back down. You know, Cadance told me pretty much the same thing a long time ago. That's just it. Part of the reason you're both perfect for this is because you wouldn't pursue it. I was the youngest student at CSGU, and it wasn't good enough. I was Celestia's pupil, and it wasn't good enough. I got an unprecedented position as a co-teacher with her, became an Archmage, took on the Queen of the Changelings, and none of it has ever been enough for me. Now I'm the captain of the Crystal Guard, and I still want to be a princess. So what happens if I become a princess and that's still not enough? I don't think there's anything after princess, Spike said. Sunset shook her head. There's always ways to get more power for ponies cunning enough. And I don't think it's just my ego talking when I say I'm cunning enough. I think you're wrong, Twilight said. I think you'd be a great princess. You have to say that, you're my student. Sunset mussed Twilight's mane. But it doesn't really matter. I couldn't be more proud of you than I am, and Cadance too. Because, I may want to be a princess, but I don't need that. I already have everything I need. I have you two, Cadance, Shining, Luna, and Celestia. Sunset placed a foreleg around both of them and pulled them closer to her. I've got my family, and that's all I ever really needed.